A small Canadian farm town made national news when a woman claimed she was raped by her own doctor. DNA tests proved the doctor was innocent. The victim insisted the DNA test was wrong. What does a high school graduate know that the world's top scientists do not? Nestled along Canada's beautiful southwestern prairie is the tiny town of Kipling, Saskatchewan. The population is so sparse, the farm animals outnumbered the residents. In a town this size, everyone knows one another.
It's a fairly quiet farming community with little crime. We may have up to 5 or 6 sexual assaults a year and break-and enters, but fairly small in the scope of criminal code work.
This is the story of one of those alleged sexual assault cases. It took place on Halloween night in 1992. Depending on whose story you believe, it was either a night of lies and trickery or an unfortunate misunderstanding. A woman we'll call Candy was working at this gas station. Her boyfriend stopped by. They got into an argument.
No, I am not dealing with you anymore. I can't even stand to look at you.
Candy drove to see her girlfriend who worked at the Kipling Memorial Union Hospital. She wasn't there. Candy appeared upset. A nurse suggested she see a doctor. Dr. John Schneeberger was on call that night. He was also Candy's doctor and had even delivered her baby. Candy says Dr. Schneeberger recommended a sedative.
I wasn't really hysterical anymore, but what I told him was that I was so mad at Danny that I felt like killing him. But I didn't actually mean that I was going to go out and kill him. I was just describing how angry I was. I had just expected that he would give me a couple pills or something, just to relax my muscles, calm me down.
Instead, Dr. Schneeberger gave Candy a shot. She says she went numb almost immediately.
Like I had no control over my muscles. It's like all my muscles left and I was just this piece of jelly falling over. I tried to scream. As I was falling over, nothing would come out except for like a croaking noise that a frog would make. It was so scary.
Candy isn't exactly sure what happened next, but believes she was raped.
When a dentist freezes your gums, you can't, and he's pulling your tooth out, you can't feel the pain from the tooth, but what you can feel is pressure of the tooth moving back and forth, and that's the only way I can describe it.
When she regained consciousness alone in the exam room, Candy had the presence of mind to place her underwear in an airtight bag. Candy was too dizzy to leave the hospital. The nurses insisted she spend the night. She said nothing of the alleged rape. The next day, she confronted Dr. Schneeberger.
I said, "What the hell was that drug you gave me last night?" And he asked me, "Why? Did it give you wild dreams?" And then I knew that, oh my God, I was gonna have a hell of a fight on my hands, because here, now he's already covering up, eh?
When Candy was released from the hospital, she spoke briefly with her parents and told them of her suspicions.
You could tell by the look on her face that something terrible had happened to her, eh?
Well, I was really hoping that wasn't true, eh? But when we saw her, we knew it
Start to go numb and not feel the power of your muscles or able to use your muscles. And then you become very tired and then asleep.
When Candy formally accused Dr. Schneeberger of rape, many residents of Kipling believed Candy was lying. Dr. Schneeberger was a respected member of the community. He had never been accused of anything like this before. Some believed Candy, as a single mother, was either romantically interested in the married doctor, or her motive was to get some sort of financial settlement to end the controversy.
The town looked up to the doctor. He was a good doctor, and he would never do anything like that. It was impossible.
Also suspicious was the fact that Candy had said nothing to hospital nurses on the night of the alleged rape.
There were 2 nurses on shift that night. In fact, both of them were in that room, the room that the rape allegedly occurred in, very shortly after. They saw nothing amiss.
To end the controversy, Dr. Schneeberger willingly agreed to give blood for a DNA test. The DNA in the blood drawn from Dr. Schneeberger did not match the biological material from Candy's rape test kit.
And I was in shock again. And I said, no, that's impossible. That's impossible. How can this be?
7 more years would go by before that question was finally answered. When DNA tests showed that Dr. Schneeberger was innocent of the sexual assault on his 20-year-old patient, most people in Kipling tried to put the whole thing behind them. But Candy, the alleged victim, would not let the issue die. All during the next year, she insisted that someone, somehow, had tampered with the first DNA test at the hospital. So Dr. Schneeberger agreed to a second DNA test in August of 1993. His blood was drawn by a registered nurse. The test was monitored by the police, and the vials were taken directly to the forensic laboratory at police headquarters.
They watched the needle actually penetrate the doctor's arm.
Once again, Dr. Schneeberger's DNA did not match the DNA on Candy's clothing or the rape test kit.
Of course, I didn't believe them. A lot of other people did believe them. And I guess it's hard, you know, how you've got DNA is the new thing and it's supposed to be so right and so perfect.
We knew there was something wrong, that, like, we totally believed her, eh? And we knew he was up to something.
Dr. Schneeberger defended himself by saying the drug he injected into Candy that night in the hospital, Versed, can cause erotic hallucinations.
Versed can account for all sorts of hallucinations, possibly, but it can't produce semen. And according to the complainant, the last time she had had intercourse was weeks before this incident.
With no other evidence, in 1994, the police closed their investigation into this matter.
The doctor has already given 2 samples, and those 2 samples were tested, and they came up as being having a DNA profile, and the profile didn't match the semen that was left at the scene. So now we're stuck where we really can't do anything.
The town of Kipling was not kind at all to Candy.
She hired a private investigator who broke into Dr. Schneeberger's car. On the headrest, he found strands of hair. But there were no roots attached, so they couldn't be used for DNA testing. Also in the car was a tube of lip balm, presumably used by Dr. Schneeberger. At her own expense, Candy asked a private lab to test the epithelial cells on the end of the lip balm. those epithelial cells would contain enough DNA for testing. And when they did, Candy finally got her first piece of positive news. The DNA from the lip balm matched the DNA from Candy's rape test kit.
I knew it all along. It wasn't a shock that something was going to match, but it was a bit of relief because at least we had that to prove to the police.
But there were two problems. First, there was no proof that the cells were Dr. Schneeberger's. Second, the evidence couldn't be used in court since the investigator broke into the car without a warrant. But if the cells on the lip balm were those of Dr. Schneeberger, why did the DNA from his lips differ from his blood sample? To find out, Candy filed a civil suit against Dr. Schneeberger and brought charges against him with the local medical society. At the hearing, Candy sat directly across from Dr. Schneeberger's wife.
If looks could kill, I would have been dead. Lisa was sitting across the table from me, and she just sat there with her arms crossed, just glaring at me like, "You little bitch, you are ruining our lives." And I just sat in my chair thinking, oh my God, you're so stupid, you know? You are so stupid, and if you don't watch it, it's gonna happen to your kids too.
All of this pressure prompted Dr. Schneeberger to agree to yet another DNA test. This time, the procedure was videotaped by police and performed at their forensics lab. The doctor appears friendly and helpful. The technician wants to take blood from his finger, but the doctor politely refuses, saying he has a disease that would cause his hands to bruise.
That's how we usually take the sample. We don't need much blood.
Since this is a voluntary test, the doctor can't be forced to do anything against his will. So the technician inserts a needle into his left arm instead. Nothing comes out.
The vein was larger, or appeared much larger than I would have expected. And I thought that was a little unusual.
She tries another tube, but still has trouble.
Sometimes the vacuum is poor in them and would not pull the blood out of the individual's arm.
Eventually, she was able to extract a sample. Afterwards, the nurse was puzzled.
It's a little strange in that, you know, like the blood doesn't look kind of fresh, I don't know.
And the lab determined that the sample was too degraded for DNA testing. Police broke the news to Candy.
And I'm like, oh my God, whatever, like, that's bullshit. This is our last chance to get blood from him, and you guys screwed up again.
The only person who had an opportunity, limited as it was her doctor. But we believed in the DNA testing. I mean, we believed in the science of DNA.
They had to follow the rules of the Canadian justice system. I call it the Canadian criminal system, because that's basically what it is. It's the criminals that have all the rights.
On April 25th, 1997, 5 years after the alleged rape, police got a break. Startling new information was discovered inside the doctor's own home. Schneeberger's stepdaughter, his wife's biological child, claimed that the doctor assaulted her too. For several years, the youngster says her stepfather had been coming into her room at night and giving her injections. his wife discovered a box full of condoms, needles, and drugs, including Versed, in the doctor's home office.
I blame myself. I still blame myself. I screamed, I bawled, I was pretty disgusted because all of these years, I mean, I'm fighting to get the truth out, but also to make sure that it didn't happen to anybody else.
Dr. John Schneeberger was arrested and ordered to undergo yet another DNA test. Again, the procedure was videotaped.
Also advise you that we have a warrant to obtain bodily substances for the purpose.
The doctor was withdrawn and silent. Police took several samples, hair, saliva, then blood. Taken from his finger, not his arm. And this time, a surprise. DNA from all 3 samples matched DNA found on Candy's vaginal swab.
Oh, that was wonderful. That was what I had wanted all along. I mean, I had even offered to go chop an arm off. I would have socked him one in the nose to get that blood, no problem.
It was quite a happy day because we knew we had him. That Candy was right and everybody else that didn't believe her was wrong.
But a big question remained unanswered. How did Dr. Schneeberger fool the previous blood DNA tests?
It was a puzzle how those samples had come to be different than the lanced finger. Even if we knew there was something different, there was no way that we could prove anything.
Especially since the nurses and police all witnessed the needle being inserted into Dr. Schneeberger's arm while the blood was drawn. On the stand, Dr. Schneeberger would reveal his secret. In November of 1999, Dr. John Schneeberger went on trial in Saskatchewan for the rape of his patient Candy and his own stepdaughter. On the witness stand, he said he surgically inserted a plastic tube under the skin into his left arm, filled with blood from one of his patients. This is why he insisted that the blood be drawn from his left arm rather than anywhere else. If you look closely at the videotape of that blood test, you'll see that the doctor is careful to pull his sleeve only so high so as not to reveal the incision where he inserted the tube. And for a brief moment, you can see the tube protruding from his arm. But by the time the 3rd test was done, 5 years after the rape accusation, the blood in the tube was old and dark, which explains why the technician was suspicious. Dr. Schneeberger, however, denied raping Candy. He claims Candy broke into his home, stole a used condom, and used that biological sample to frame him. He said he used his patient's blood for the DNA test because he had no other way to defend himself.
When that came up at trial that he thought Candy broke into his house and stole samples or whatever, it was laughable. It was absolutely laughable that he had to grasp at straws like that. It was just laughable.
I was a bulldog on the stand. I kicked his lawyer's ass. And he's supposed to be the best lawyer in southern Saskatchewan, best defense lawyer. Well, I showed him who was boss.
I mean, you run across strong-willed individuals. Sometimes the strong-willed individuals are right and sometimes they're wrong. And this particular strong-willed person was right, and she was right all along, and she was determined to see that what happened to her didn't happen to anyone else.
This would be right up around the top as far as being the most bizarre and most involved and involving all the forensic evidence here of any case that I had.
Dr. Schneeberger was found guilty of sexually assaulting Candy as well as drugging her and obstructing justice. He was also convicted of sexually assaulting his stepdaughter and was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
I'm so proud of Candy. If it was me, I don't know if I could handle everything that she went through. It was just, and the test came back negative and she had to fight, and it was just a constant battle.
While taping this interview, Candy received a telephone call in which she learned Dr. Schneeberger had been denied parole.
I won again! That's so exciting. He lost. He lost both of his chances to get out for day parole and full parole. Oh my God, isn't that great? Woohoo! Anyway, I was so worried that he was gonna get out and everybody was gonna fall for his lies and bullshit again, but they didn't. They didn't. They're smarter than the rest. Oh my God. Do you guys know how exciting this is for me? It's like celebration.
You have to remember that the DNA also led us off the path. So when I lecture on this particular case to younger police officers, I say to them, remember the DNA does give you something, but it has to be supported with corroborative evidence.
It was very frustrating not being able to have all the answers, but it finally did come together after 7 years and 24 days.
On a sweltering Texas summer day in 1993, a work crew noticed something unusual off the side of the road. Under a thicket of thorn bushes was the nude, decapitated body of a young girl. Just 200 feet away was another body, a young white male. Residents of this small town wondered who would brutally kill two young people in this way, and what was the possible motive. Cut Off Road, a remote spot in Tellico, Texas, linked by a rickety wooden bridge over Smith Creek. This is the area where a road crew discovered the nude body of an adolescent girl. She had been shot, stabbed, decapitated, and her hands removed. She also had extensive wounds on her abdomen, thighs, and genital area. Under the bridge was another victim, a young white male fully clothed who had been shot twice in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. On a barbed wire fence, detectives found several long blonde hairs. In the boy's back pocket was a wallet with a library card.
The library card had the name, which stated James Brian King. And we thought that may be him, but we weren't sure at this point because it was not a photo ID type. It was just a card with a name on it.
The girl's identification was more difficult, since there were no hands for fingerprints, and with the decapitation, no opportunity for a dental comparison.
She looked like a young adolescent, teenage white girl. She also had amputations of both nipples and a number of other cuts, mostly on the front of her body. She had some very long cuts down the front of the abdomen with extrusion or evisceration of part of the intestines to the outside.
A rape test kit showed no signs of sexual assault. Homicide investigators visited the father of the boy, James King.
And we showed Mr. King the wallet that had been retrieved from the white male's body, and he opened it and looked at some of the photos and looked at the library card, and we could tell his eyes began to get watery. And he said, yeah, I recognize the wallet. This is the wallet I gave to him, my son.
Mr. King also said that the girl's body might be his stepdaughter, 13-year-old Christina Benjamin, but wasn't sure because of the condition of the body. Mr. King told police that a few nights earlier, Brian was sleeping outside in a hammock when a car sounded its horn out front. He saw Brian talking to someone in a tan car. Then Brian got in and left. The next day, the family discovered that Christina was missing too. Investigators compared the hair on Christina's hairbrush to several long blonde hairs found near the murder scene on the barbed wire fence.
Once the hairs from the barbed wire and the hairs from the strand that were found out at the crime scene location were submitted to the laboratory, I produced microscope slides, and I compared those hairs to the hairs from the hairbrush, and they were microscopically consistent with one another.
The family also provided police with an X-ray of Christina's recent foot injury. That X-ray matched an X-ray of the girl's foot taken at the autopsy.
The night they found her, or the day they found her, Donna called me up that night and said, "Mom, I need some help." She said, "Chrissy, Dad, she's been murdered." And I couldn't believe it. And that's how we found out about it.
I could never imagine losing a child. And nobody, unless it's happened to you, nobody else can either. I can't imagine what my mom went through.
In the crime lab, Charles Lynch found a foreign blonde head hair on Brian King's pants, which did not belong to either Brian or Christina. Lynch also spotted a single fiber attached to Brian's sneaker. It was nearly invisible.
I looked at the fiber from the male victim's shoe using transmitted light microscopy. I'd seen those types of carpet fibers before, usually from Japanese vehicles, and this was a tan fiber, so that was my communication to the police, that it may be from a tan vehicle of Japanese make.
Investigators hoped that this single fiber would lead them to the automobile Brian King got into on his last night alive. The grisly murder of two local teenagers was a highly publicized case in the small Texas community where the bodies were found. The viciousness of the murders even shocked the pathologist in this case.
It's the worst case of mutilation that I've seen in my work here. I have seen other cases of mutilation and seen a lot of cases of what they call the crimes of passion or overkill, where someone's stabbed or shot multiple times. But this is the only case I've seen like this where someone had this much mutilation of the body, probably after death.
Psychological profilers say that killers like this usually have aberrant drives and appetites. The savage treatment of Christina was indicative of vengeance and extreme hatred and suggested that the killer knew the victim. Local prosecutors went to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, to find out more about the mindset of this killer.
One of them said to me, after he looked at the photographs, he said, "This is not a sexual crime." And I was a little confused because obviously she was nude and never found her clothing. And he said, whoever committed this crime did not have sex with her.
One trait common among individuals who have committed similar crimes is a history of abusing animals. Neighbors told police that Brian and Christina were planning to go out with a boy named Jason on the night they disappeared. And there was an anonymous telephone call to the sheriff's office.
The caller supposedly told this dispatcher that we needed to be looking at a subject by the name of Jason Massey.
Jason Massey was a 20-year-old high school dropout, the son of an alcoholic and drug user who spent his time moving from one run-down tenement to another. Jason was a petty criminal with a history of stalking, harassment, theft, and, most surprisingly, a history of abuse to animals.
A couple of days before the discovery of the bodies, Ennis police had received a call of a calf had been mutilated behind McDonald's. On their arrival, they observed a tan car. They also found a bracelet on the ground with the name Jason on it. there was a figure had ran from the scene who was later identified as Jason Eric Massey.
Massey's friends painted a bizarre portrait of the troubled young man.
This guy also told me about how Jason Massey liked to mutilate animals such as dogs, cats, cows, and that Jason would, every chance he'd get, he would kill a dog and cut his head off. He calls them his trophies. And I said, well, what does he do with these heads? He said, well, he keeps them in a metal cooler.
And police discovered evidence that Massey knew Brian and Christina casually.
Jason Massey made comments about Christina, about how he really liked her and he wanted to take her out.
While everything seemed to point to Massey, there was very little forensic evidence found at the crime scene.
No smoking gun, so to speak. The case had to be developed. We had two children. The bodies were horrific, the way they were found, particularly the girl. Much work needed to be done to develop it.
The great difficulty in the case all along was what happened. How did this boy get killed? How did the girl get killed? What was the sequence? What was she sexually assaulted? What was the motive? Why was it done? And that was completely missing from the crime scene.
Police brought Jason Massey in for questioning.
I said, Jason, I said, I want you to see something. And he looked at me and I threw down some photos of the crime scene, which showed Christina Benjamin and Brian King. And I said, Jason, I said, I want you to look at her. I said, tell me one thing. I said, is she as pretty now in these photos as she was that night that you had her? And he looked down and he looked at me, and the next thing I know, he's kind of bending over and he's gagging real big time, And I knew I hit a soft spot in him, when he did that. I'll never forget that expression of him.
Despite the circumstantial evidence against Jason Massey, there was no proof. For that, investigators needed scientific evidence. Armed with a search warrant, police collected samples of Jason Massey's hair and also impounded his Subaru automobile. A piece of the tan carpet was removed for scientific analysis. Also inside were 3 stains on the seat, which tested positive for blood.
When we got into the trunk of Jason Massey's car, there was a single leaf with a blood stain on it, a roll of duct tape with apparent blood on it, and also a hammer that appeared to have blood on it.
There was no sign of the .22 caliber weapon used in the murders. However, police did find a cash register receipt for some .22 caliber ammunition, as well as a set of handcuffs and a hunting knife. Investigators received another phone tip, this one saying that Massey was seen washing his car inside and out at a local car wash. Police immediately searched the contents of the vacuum machine at that car wash. Inside, they found an appointment card from Massey's probation officer and a number of long blonde hairs.
Head hairs from the vehicle of Jason Massey and head hairs found at the car wash location were all microscopically similar to those of Christina Benjamin.
The blood found in Massey's car was tested for DNA, but it couldn't be compared to the bodies since they were too badly degraded for DNA analysis. Instead, scientists relied on reverse paternity genotyping. By analyzing the DNA profile of Brian and Christina's biological parents and comparing it to the DNA profile of the blood in Massey's car, scientists could see if there were similar genetic markers.
We were able to determine that yes, much more certainly that blood did come from Christina Benjamin.
Scientists also needed to know if the time of the deaths matched the time frame Jason Massey and his automobile were in the victim's neighborhood.
Our best evidence was a forensic entomologist that, looking at the larva activity found on the bodies, could come up with a pretty good idea of when they were killed in relation to each other and in relation to time in general.
Massey was arrested and charged with capital murder. He pleaded not guilty.
Jason Massey was a handsome young man, and I was worried that if he took the stand and testified that he might sway some of the jurors.
Guilt or innocence would be determined by the forensic evidence.
No one of those sciences was able to show beyond a reasonable doubt that Massey committed the crime, but put all together, it meant that either Massey had committed the crime or he had to be the most unlucky person in the history of the world, because every piece of evidence pointed toward him.
Before the trial ended, prosecutors learned even more about Jason Massey. Information that would seal his fate. In 1994, Jason Massey went on trial in Texas for the murders of 14-year-old Brian King and 13-year-old Christina Benjamin. Prosecutors believe that both Brian and Christina got into Jason Massey's car around midnight on July 27th for a ride in the country. Prosecutors also believe Massey's plans included much more than just a ride. Massey stopped his car on the Cutoff Road Bridge and shot Brian King twice in the head at point-blank range with a .22 caliber pistol. He then pushed him out of the car off the side of the bridge. Christina got out of the car and ran. Jason followed, shot her in the back, but the wound wasn't fatal. Later, he shot her in the head, then stabbed her. Prosecutors believe the mutilation occurred after death. Christina's head and hands have never been recovered. The motive was difficult for prosecutors to identify.
There was no traditional motive in this case, and instead, Massey was most likely what's referred to as a lust murderer. That is, a person that receives a certain degree of sexual gratification from the killing and mutilation of human beings.
Before the trial was over, a hunter walking in the woods made a gruesome discovery. He found a red cooler. Inside, with the decapitated heads of 31 animals, and also the journals of Jason Massey revealing his hideous deeds and horrific thoughts. These Slayer books of death, as Massey called them, were a frightening and incriminating insight into the mind of a killer, a mind obsessed with murder, sex, and mutilation of young girls. The jury found Jason Eric Massey guilty of the two murders. 2 young lives were avenged.
Mr. Massey, any comment on your guilty conviction?
No, ma'am, I'm just glad it's over.
For the penalty phase, prosecutors had just 24 hours to assemble the information contained in Jason Massey's journals to convince the court that the death penalty was appropriate.
He started out with killing 8 cows, 30 dogs, and 39 cats, and he cut off their heads and kept them as trophies.
Here's one where he's talking about a little girl, and he says that he loves her and he's decided to kill her, he just doesn't know when.
Prosecutors told the jury that Jason Massey's journal contained evidence that he had planned to kill again and again. Massey's writings revealed that his greatest aspiration in life was to become the most famous serial killer in America.
We wanted the jury to know just the kind of person that we were dealing with. And that person was one that was obviously going to be a predator of incredible proportions.
The jury deliberated just 15 minutes and decided upon the death penalty.
Well, the judge said, I sentence you to death by lethal injection, and the only injustice in this court today will be that your death will be so much more humane than that of your victims. The judge said that. And everybody stood up and cheered for the judge.
Jason Massey was executed on April 3rd, 2001. Christina's grandparents witnessed his last moments alive.
This was Jason Eric Massey's final statement just prior to his execution. He said, yes, first I would like to speak to the victim's family. First of all, I would like to say that I do not know that any of y'all, and that's unfortunate because I'd like to apologize to each and every one of you individually. I can't imagine what I've taken from y'all, but I do want to apologize.
I apologize to you for what I did. I want you to know that it was only I who committed the murders. No one else was involved. Christina felt no pain. The things done to her occurred after her death. I swear, the things done to her occurred after her death, I swear. Her head and hands I threw into the Trinity River. I didn't rape or torture her either. I admit my guilt, and I ask your forgiveness. I pray you will forgive me. If not now, then in the future. May God be with you and keep you through this. His servant, Jason Eric Massey. I don't know how to describe it other than we watched him die. We had no emotions other than we were watching this person die. He kept mouthing, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. We didn't believe him. No, there's no way that you could forgive this man for what he did.
It was quick, it was painless. He was lucky, you know. The way I look at it, my brother and my stepsister weren't so lucky. I mean, you know, they died horrible deaths.
I'm not the one that was going to have to judge him. And I can't judge him, but I can never forgive him.
Detectives were very good and efficient. They did their jobs well.
The first bones surfaced after 30 years of silence. It wasn't uncovered by detectives. It wasn't discovered by construction workers. It wasn't revealed by some miraculous DNA breakthrough. It was found by a frightened 12-year-old boy chasing his escaped hunting dog through a stretch of overgrown woodland outside Black Creek, Georgia, in the spring of 2023. The dog refused to leave an ancient oak tree standing alone in the middle of what locals simply called Hollow Field. The boy thought the animal had cornered a raccoon. Instead, he noticed something pale protruding from the loose red clay after a week of relentless rain. A human hand. Within hours, deputies sealed off nearly 20 acres. Crime scene tape fluttered beneath dark storm clouds while reporters gathered outside the tree line. The sheriff initially believed they were dealing with an old forgotten burial, perhaps from the Civil War or an abandoned cemetery swallowed by the forest decades earlier. He was wrong. The forensic anthropologist brushed away another layer of wet soil. Then another. Soon an entire skeleton emerged. Female. Adult. Hands bound behind the back with faded nylon rope. A fractured skull.
No identification. No jewelry. No wallet.
Nothing except a rusted brass key tucked inside the left jacket pocket. The number stamped onto the key was barely visible. 317. No one understood its meaning.
Not yet.
3 days later, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation entered the scene. Special Agent Nathan Cole stood silently beside the excavation pit as technicians continued searching the surrounding ground. The silence bothered him more than the remains themselves. Whoever buried the victim hadn't rushed. The grave had been dug nearly 6 feet deep. Heavy limestone rocks had been placed above the body before the hole was filled. The killer hadn't acted in panic.
Someone had planned this.
Someone expected the body never to be found. Cole had spent 27 years investigating homicide. He recognized patience when he saw it. The laboratory confirmed the obvious. The victim had been dead for roughly 3 decades. Estimated year of death. The fractured skull indicated repeated blunt force trauma.
No firearm. No knife wounds.
The rope binding remained remarkably preserved beneath the clay. Tiny blue synthetic fibers clung to several knots. They would become important later. At that moment, they meant nothing. Georgia newspapers immediately revived an old phrase the town had tried desperately to forget. Cold case. Residents who hadn't spoken about the summer of 1993 suddenly found television cameras waiting outside their front doors. Old rumors returned. Old fears resurfaced. Parents remembered locking their doors before sunset. Children remembered bicycles left abandoned in empty streets. Nobody needed reminding. Everyone remembered that summer. Because another woman had vanished then. Without explanation. Without witnesses. Without a body. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. 28 years old. Elementary school librarian. Known throughout Black Creek for organizing weekend reading programs. She lived alone in a white farmhouse outside town after her husband died in a logging accident 4 years earlier. Neighbors described her the same way. Quiet.
Kind.
Predictable. Every Friday, she bought groceries from Miller's Market. Every Saturday, she visited her younger sister. Every Sunday, she attended church. Then one humid evening in August 1993, she simply disappeared. Her pickup truck remained parked beside her house. The front door stood unlocked. Dinner still sat untouched on the kitchen table. The television continued playing until sometime after midnight. Nothing appeared stolen. Nothing broken. Only one strange detail disturbed investigators. Every family photograph had disappeared from the house. Frames remained hanging on the walls. Glass remained intact. But every photograph had been carefully removed. Who steals pictures and leaves everything else behind? No answer ever came. The original investigation consumed nearly 6 months. More than 400 interviews. Thousands of volunteer search hours. Helicopters. Tracking dogs.
Divers.
Nothing. Sarah Whitmore simply vanished. Without blood. Without fingerprints. Without ransom demands. Without a single confirmed sighting after August 18, 1993. Eventually, the headlines faded. The investigation slowed. Then stopped. The case entered storage. Another forgotten mystery buried beneath years of dust. Until Hollowfield surrendered its secret. The first DNA extraction required nearly 3 weeks. Bone samples traveled through multiple laboratories before analysts finally confirmed what many already suspected. The skeleton belonged to Sarah Whitmore. Black Creek exploded with shock. 30 years. 30 years she had remained hidden less than 5 miles from town. 30 years families drove past Hollowfield without realizing a murder victim rested beneath the trees. 30 years someone carried the truth. And said nothing. Cole requested every surviving box from the original investigation. The county archives delivered 18 weathered cartons stacked inside the evidence warehouse. Dust covered everything. Handwritten witness statements. Cassette interviews. Developed photographs.
Maps.
Receipts. Anonymous letters. Thousands of pages. Most hadn't been touched since the late 1990s.
Cole preferred it that way.
Old files often whispered louder than new evidence. The first box contained Sarah's personal belongings. Wallet. House keys. Eyeglasses. Prescription bottle. Nothing unusual. Except the brass key recovered with her remains did not belong there. No record mentioned key 317. No evidence log described it, meaning the killer had placed it inside Sarah's pocket after the original disappearance. Or investigators had never found it. Either possibility was troubling. Detective Emily Ross joined the review team the following morning. 34 years old. Methodical. Relentless. raised only 20 miles from Black Creek. Unlike Cole, she remembered hearing whispers about Sarah Whitmore as a child. Parents used the case as a warning. Be home before dark. Don't talk to strangers. Lock every door. Sarah had become less of a person, more of a cautionary tale. Emily hated that. Victims deserved names, not legends. Together they reconstructed Sarah's final known day, August 18th. She checked out books from the county library, bought groceries, filled her truck with gasoline, spoke briefly with the mail carrier, visited the pharmacy, returned home around 5:20 p.m. At 6:07 p.m., her sister called. No answer. At 7:12 p.m., a neighbor noticed Sarah's porch light already on. By midnight, she was gone. No witnesses reported screams. No suspicious vehicles. No signs of forced entry. It looked impossible, until Emily discovered something no one had noticed in 30 years. Folded inside an overlooked interview transcript was a handwritten note clipped to the back. Not from police. Not from a witness. Written in blue ink across the margin were 7 simple words. Don't ask the brother about the attic. There was no signature. No explanation. Only that sentence. Emily read it twice. Then a third time. Sarah Whitmore had no brothers. According to every official record, she had only one sibling. A younger sister. Which meant whoever wrote the note wasn't referring to Sarah's family. They were referring to someone else's. And somehow, that forgotten sentence had remained hidden inside the case file for 30 years, waiting for someone willing to read every page. Emily placed the faded interview transcript beneath a document scanner. The ink had almost disappeared, but the words remained unmistakable. Don't ask the brother about the attic. No initials. No date.
No signature.
Just 7 words that somehow escaped every investigator who handled the file during the 1990s. Nathan Cole looked at the scanned image. Find the original witness. The interview belonged to Margaret Ellis, age 63 in 1993, Sarah Whitmore's next-door neighbor. She had died 12 years earlier. Her testimony had been taken only 48 hours after Sarah vanished. Emily reread every page. Margaret described hearing a truck shortly after sunset. She remembered a porch light turning off. She saw nothing unusual afterward.
Routine.
Ordinary. Until the final page. The handwritten note had been clipped behind her statement instead of inside it. Someone had deliberately hidden it. Emily checked the evidence log. Nothing. The note had never been cataloged. It officially did not exist, which meant one of two things. Either an investigator secretly left it behind, or someone slipped it into the file after the case went cold. Neither possibility made sense. Cole ordered every original detective's notebook recovered from storage. Most had yellowed with age. Coffee stains covered several pages. Loose receipts fell from old folders. Then one notebook stopped Emily cold. Detective Robert Gaines, lead investigator, retired in 1998, deceased. Near the middle of his notebook, one page had been torn out. Not accidentally. Removed with precision. The following page began with only 4 words. Interview postponed again. No explanation. No name. Nothing. Emily compared dates. The missing notebook page corresponded to August 24, 1993. Exactly 1 day after Margaret Ellis had given her statement. The timing was too perfect. Someone had erased whatever Gaines intended to write. Meanwhile, forensic technicians examined the brass key recovered from Sarah's jacket. Years underground had damaged its surface, but microscopic restoration exposed additional markings beneath the number.
BCS.
Emily searched every public record in Black Creek. Nothing. Banks. Schools. Factories. Warehouses. No business matched those initials. Then an elderly clerk at the county records office quietly spoke up. There used to be one. What was it? Black Creek Storage. The storage facility had closed in 1998. The property still existed. Rows of rusted storage units stretched across the edge of town behind an abandoned feed mill.
Most had collapsed.
Some had burned. A handful remained standing. Emily found the original ownership records. Locker 317. Rented continuously from March 1993 until October 1993. Tenant name: Daniel Mercer. Nobody on the investigation recognized the name. State records showed Mercer died in a car accident in Alabama in 2007. No children.
No surviving spouse.
Minimal financial history. He appeared completely unrelated to Sarah Whitmore. Until Emily opened the original rental agreement. Emergency contact: Thomas Mercer.
Occupation: carpenter.
Address: Black Creek. Thomas Mercer, 78 years old. Still alive. Still living in the same white farmhouse outside town. Emily and Cole drove there before sunset. The old man answered after the second knock. The moment he heard Daniel's name, his expression changed. Not surprise. Fear. Pure fear. I haven't heard that name in years. Cole spoke calmly. We're reopening the Sarah Whitmore case. Thomas gripped the doorframe tightly. I figured someday you would. Emily noticed his eyes drifting repeatedly toward the second floor. Toward the attic. Cole asked quietly, Mind if we come inside? Thomas hesitated. Then stepped aside. The farmhouse looked untouched since the early 1990s. Old furniture. Family photographs. Dust-covered books. Nothing unusual. Until Emily noticed one picture hanging above the fireplace. Thomas.
His wife.
A teenage boy. Daniel Mercer. Standing beside. Sarah Whitmore. Smiling. Emily stared at the photograph. You knew Sarah. Thomas nodded slowly. Our families were close. Why wasn't that mentioned in 1993? Silence. Long enough to answer the question without words. Cole pointed toward the staircase. Is the attic upstairs? Thomas closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Finally he whispered, I told Robert Gaines about the attic. Emily's pulse quickened. The detective? He never came back. Thomas slowly climbed the stairs. Each step echoed through the old farmhouse. At the end of the hallway, he unlocked a narrow wooden door. The attic smelled of old pine and dust. Boxes lined both sides beneath the sloped roof. Everything appeared ordinary, until Thomas stopped beside a faded cedar chest. I was told never to open this again. Who told you? My son. Daniel Mercer. 3 weeks before Sarah disappeared. Thomas lifted the lid. Inside lay old blankets. Christmas decorations. Family letters. Nothing connected to a murder. Then Emily noticed the false bottom. She tapped it gently. Hollow. Cole removed a pocket knife. Carefully lifted the wooden panel. A narrow compartment appeared beneath it. Inside rested a weathered leather journal wrapped in oilcloth. And a Polaroid photograph. Emily picked up the picture first. Her breath caught. It showed Sarah Whitmore standing beside Daniel Mercer in front of the Black Creek storage facility. The date stamped across the bottom read, August 16, 1993. Just 2 days before Sarah vanished. On the back of the photograph, written in black marker, were 5 chilling words. She knows about the family. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Emily held the Polaroid beneath the attic light, studying every detail. Sarah Whitmore stood beside Daniel Mercer, smiling faintly, unaware of the camera. Behind them, the faded sign for Black Creek Storage was clearly visible. Daniel wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking over his shoulder, as though he expected someone else to arrive. The back of the photograph disturbed Cole more than the image itself. She knows about the family.
Not.
She knows about me.
Not.
She knows the truth. The family. Whoever wrote those words believed the danger extended beyond one person. Emily carefully unfolded the leather journal. Most pages contained ordinary entries. Home repairs, work schedules, lumber deliveries, expenses. Nothing suspicious. Then the handwriting changed. The neat script became hurried.
Shaky.
Several words had been crossed out and rewritten. The first unusual entry carried the date. August 10, 1993. Sarah asked too many questions today. Another entry. August 12th. Daniel thinks she'll let it go. I don't believe him. No explanation followed. Only silence across the next 2 pages. Then came August 15th. The attic wasn't locked. Someone has been inside. Nothing appears missing. Not yet. Emily looked toward Thomas Mercer. You've never read this? The old man slowly shook his head. My son told me never to. Cole continued turning pages. The final completed entry stopped halfway through a sentence. August 18th, 1993. Tonight we're finally going to explain nothing more. The sentence ended abruptly. The remaining pages were blank. August 18th. The night Sarah disappeared. Forensic technicians sealed both the journal and the photograph before transporting them to the crime lab. As they prepared to leave, Thomas Mercer quietly spoke again. There was something else. Emily turned. What? My son wasn't afraid of Sarah. He was afraid of his brother. The room became perfectly still. Emily frowned. Daniel had a brother? Thomas nodded. Older. Jacob. Cole immediately checked the original case file. Nothing.
No Jacob Mercer. No interviews.
No family records mentioning a second son. Officially, Daniel Mercer was an only child. Thomas stared at the floor. We changed his name. Emily's voice remained calm. Why? He left home in 1985.
After
everything. What happened? Thomas swallowed hard. We pretended he never existed. Back at headquarters, Daniel Mercer's birth certificate confirmed he had indeed been born second. A line beneath his parents' names caught Emily's attention. Previous issue, Jacob Allen Mercer. The document referenced another birth record.
Sealed.
The court order had remained hidden for nearly 40 years. Jacob Mercer legally changed his name in October 1985. New name.
Jacob Hale.
Reason listed. Confidential. Jacob Hale.
Alive.
Age 61. Current residence. Savannah, Georgia. Emily looked at Cole. The missing brother. Cole nodded once. And someone spent decades making sure nobody connected him to this family. Meanwhile, forensic analysts examined the leather journal under alternate light sources. Invisible writing slowly appeared between 2 diary pages. Pressure marks. Someone had written on a missing sheet. Electrostatic imaging recovered only fragments. Storage. Locker. Don't trust. Then one complete sentence emerged. If anything happens, the tape stays hidden.
Tape.
Not a cassette listed in evidence. Not surveillance tape.
Just
the tape. Emily reopened the inventory from Thomas Mercer's attic.
No recordings. No audio.
Nothing. Then she remembered something almost too obvious. The cedar chest itself. The evidence team returned that afternoon. The chest was x-rayed before being moved. A long rectangular object appeared inside the back panel. Hidden between 2 layers of wood. The compartment had escaped discovery for decades. Technicians carefully removed the panel. Inside rested a VHS cassette wrapped in newspaper dated August 1993. No label. No markings. Just black electrical tape around the plastic case. Emily stared at it. Don't play it yet. The forensic lab first dusted the cassette for prints. Only 2 partial fingerprints survived. One belonged to Daniel Mercer. The second did not belong to Thomas. Did not belong to Sarah. Did not belong to anyone in the original investigation. The print matched a man arrested in Florida in 2008 for identity fraud. His legal name at the time, Jacob Hale. The missing brother had touched the tape, which meant one of 2 things. He had hidden it, or he had tried to remove it. Either possibility meant the Mercer family's secret had survived for 30 years. Waiting inside an old attic that almost no one had bothered to search. The VHS cassette was older than many of the detectives now assigned to the case. Its plastic shell had yellowed with age. Dust clung to the edges of the magnetic tape. The evidence technician handled it with extraordinary care. One mistake could snap the fragile film and erase whatever had survived inside for 3 decades.
Brooks.
No. In this investigation, it was Nathan Cole who stood silently behind the glass, watching the restoration process. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes remained fixed on the monitor. The tape finally began to play. Static. A burst of distorted color. Then an image slowly appeared. The recording had been made with a handheld camcorder. Someone laughed behind the camera. The date appeared in the lower corner. August 17, 1993. One day before Sarah Whitmore disappeared. The footage showed a family barbecue behind the Mercer farmhouse. Children running through the yard. Neighbors talking. Daniel Mercer grilling hamburgers. Thomas sitting beneath an oak tree. Everything looked painfully ordinary. Sarah Whitmore appeared several minutes into the recording. She smiled. She waved toward the camera. Nothing about her suggested she had less than 24 hours left before vanishing. Emily watched carefully. Victims often notice things that investigators overlooked. Sarah repeatedly glanced toward the old red barn behind the farmhouse. Not once. Not twice. At least 6 times during the recording. She looked uneasy, as though waiting for someone. Then the camera shifted. A man walked out of the barn. His face entered view for less than 2 seconds. The image blurred as the camera moved. Daniel immediately stepped in front of the lens. The recording stopped. Emily replayed those 2 seconds over and over. The forensic imaging team sharpened every frame. Slowly, the man's features became clearer. Gray baseball cap, dark beard, long scar across the left cheek. Cole compared the image against the driver's license photograph of Jacob Hale. Perfect match. Jacob Mercer had been present. Officially, he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Black Creek. The discovery raised a devastating question. Why had every witness insisted Daniel was an only child? Someone hadn't simply forgotten Jacob. They had erased him. While the video underwent enhancement, another forensic report arrived. The blue synthetic fibers recovered from the rope binding Sarah's wrists had finally been identified. Industrial carpet fibers. Manufactured between 1988 and 1992. Used almost exclusively in commercial office buildings and self-storage facilities. Emily looked toward the evidence board. Black Creek Storage. Locker 317. The brass key. Everything pointed back to the same place. The abandoned storage complex was searched for the second time. This time investigators ignored the visible units. Instead, they studied old construction blueprints recovered from county archives. One drawing caught Daniel's attention. The original building included a basement records room. No such room existed today. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a rectangular concrete chamber beneath the office. It had been intentionally sealed during renovations in 1995. No permit explained why. No inspection mentioned it. Someone had buried an entire room beneath the building. Concrete saws screamed through the afternoon. Dust filled the air. Hours later, investigators uncovered a steel hatch. The lock had rusted shut decades earlier. It took nearly 20 minutes to force open. A rush of stale air escaped from below. Cole descended first. Flashlight raised. The room measured barely 15 feet across. Metal shelves lined every wall. Most had collapsed. Boxes lay scattered across the floor. Water damage had destroyed countless documents. Yet one cabinet remained untouched.
Locked. Dry.
Almost pristine. Inside were rental contracts dating back to the early 1990s. Most belonged to ordinary customers. Then Emily found locker 317. Daniel Mercer's file. Attached to the contract was something that should never have been there. A visitor's sign-in sheet. 3 names appeared. Daniel Mercer. Sarah Whitmore.
And
Jacob Hale. Signed using his original name. Jacob Mercer.
Date.
August 18, 1993. The day Sarah disappeared. Cole stared at the page. For 30 years, investigators believed Sarah vanished from her home. Now official records placed her at Black Creek Storage hours before she was reported missing. Someone had hidden that evidence beneath a concrete floor. Emily continued searching the cabinet. Near the back sat a plain brown envelope marked only with the handwritten word, insurance. Inside were dozens of Polaroids documenting the interior of locker 317. At first they appeared routine. Empty walls, concrete floor, metal shelving. Then the final photograph stopped everyone cold. Sarah Whitmore stood inside the locker, facing someone outside the frame. Her expression wasn't frightened. It was shocked, as if she had just recognized the person standing in front of her. Scrawled across the bottom of the Polaroid in fading black ink were 6 words. She finally learned whose daughter she was. The photograph remained on the evidence table long after everyone else stopped talking. Emily stared at Sarah's face. There was no panic, no sign of someone being held against her will. Only disbelief. The kind of expression people wear when a lifetime of certainty collapses in a single sentence. Cole read the handwritten caption again. She finally learned whose daughter she was.
Not.
Who killed her.
Not.
What she discovered. Whose daughter she was. The message wasn't about a murder. It was about identity. The investigation immediately shifted. Instead of asking who wanted Sarah dead, detectives began asking who Sarah really was. Sarah Whitmore's birth certificate was retrieved from the Georgia Department of Public Health. Nothing unusual. Born September 14, 1965. Parents listed as Richard and Helen Whitmore. Hospital records matched. Everything appeared legitimate. Until Emily noticed one missing document. There was no delivery record.
No attending physician.
No original admission paperwork. Only the certificate itself. For a hospital operating in 1965, that was nearly impossible. The archives supervisor apologized. A basement flood destroyed many records. Emily wasn't convinced. Floods destroyed random files. Not every record connected to a single birth. DNA analysts expanded testing using Sarah's recovered remains. The goal wasn't identifying her. That was already confirmed. The goal was genealogy. Within 48 hours, the first family tree comparisons returned. Emily expected confirmation of the Whitmore bloodline. Instead, the report contained a bright red notification. Parentage inconsistent. Richard Whitmore was not Sarah's biological father. Neither was Helen Whitmore her biological mother. Silence filled the conference room. Cole slowly lowered the report. So she was adopted. Daniel shook his head. No adoption records. No amended birth certificate. No legal transfer. So, what does that leave? Emily answered quietly. Someone replaced a child. The theory sounded impossible, until another analyst entered carrying a second report. Sarah shared nearly 25% of her DNA with Thomas Mercer. Everyone froze. Thomas wasn't simply connected to the case. He was family. Emily recalculated the relationship. Too much shared DNA for cousins. Too little for siblings. The numbers fit one explanation. Thomas Mercer was Sarah's biological uncle, which meant one of Thomas's brothers or sisters had been Sarah's biological parent. Cole immediately returned to the Mercer family records. Thomas had one younger sister, Elizabeth Mercer, officially deceased. Cause of death. Complications during childbirth. Emily opened the thin county file. The death certificate existed. The burial permit existed. The cemetery plot existed. Only one thing was missing. The infant. No birth record. No death record. No hospital discharge. Nothing. What if the baby survived? Nobody answered, because everyone in the room was thinking the same thing. Thomas Mercer was brought back for another interview. This time, Emily placed the DNA report on the table. He stared at it without speaking. Minutes passed. Finally,
he began to cry.
Not quietly, not briefly. 30 years of silence collapsed in front of 2 detectives. My sister had a little girl. Emily remained silent. Thomas continued. Elizabeth wasn't married. Our father said nobody could know. What happened after the birth? They told us the baby died. But she didn't. Thomas slowly shook his head. I learned the truth years later. According to Thomas, his father secretly gave the infant to Richard and Helen Whitmore. The Whitmores had struggled to have children. The arrangement was never documented.
No adoption.
No court order. Nothing. Only a private agreement between two families. Sarah grew up believing she was a Whitmore, never knowing she had been born a Mercer. Emily leaned forward. Did Sarah ever learn the truth? Thomas closed his eyes. 3 days before she disappeared. Everything suddenly aligned. The photograph, the handwritten note, the strange caption. Sarah hadn't uncovered a financial conspiracy first. She had uncovered her own identity. But why would that get her killed?
Cole asked.
Thomas answered almost immediately. Because she asked about her real mother. Elizabeth Mercer, officially buried in Black Creek Cemetery. Detectives obtained a court order. The grave was opened 2 days later. Forensic anthropologists examined the remains. Hours passed. Then the lead examiner walked toward Cole. There are 2 problems. What are they? First, these aren't the remains of a woman who died during childbirth. Cole felt his stomach tighten. And second, the examiner looked directly at him. There was never a coffin buried here. What? The casket is empty. An empty grave had been sitting in Black Creek Cemetery since 1966. For 57 years, the town believed Elizabeth Mercer had been buried beneath a marble headstone. There had never been a body. Someone had faked a death nearly 3 decades before Sarah Whitmore vanished. And suddenly, the murder in 1993 no longer looked like the beginning of the story. It looked like the latest chapter in a family secret that had started generations earlier. The empty grave transformed the investigation overnight. For 30 years, detectives believed they were chasing a killer. Now, they were chasing a lie that had begun in 1966. Every document connected to Elizabeth Mercer was pulled from county archives. Birth records, hospital records, funeral permits, church registers, insurance claims. One by one, investigators spread them across the conference room walls. Something became immediately obvious. Almost every document had been signed by the same county clerk, Walter Grayson, dead since 1999. Emily requested Grayson's employment file. Nothing unusual. 32 years working for Black Creek County. No disciplinary actions. No criminal record. Respected. Trusted. Then Daniel found a handwritten retirement letter tucked into the back of the file. Only one sentence stood out. Some secrets should stay buried with me. No context. No explanation. At the time, it sounded sentimental.
Now,
it sounded like a confession. Forensic document specialists examined every signature Walter Grayson had placed on Elizabeth Mercer's paperwork. The ink matched. The handwriting matched. The paper did not. The death certificate had been printed on county stationery that wasn't manufactured until 1978, 12 years after Elizabeth supposedly died. Someone had forged the document years later. That discovery changed everything. Elizabeth Mercer hadn't simply disappeared from history. Someone had rewritten history. Meanwhile, technicians continued restoring the VHS tape recovered from the attic. Enhanced audio revealed a conversation that had previously been buried beneath static. The voices were distant, hard to understand. But one sentence emerged clearly.
Sarah,
softly asking, "Why didn't anyone tell me I had another uncle?" The answer came from Jacob Mercer. "Because he isn't dead." The room fell silent. Emily replayed the sentence. Again and again.
Not.
He wasn't dead. He isn't dead. Present tense. Who was Jacob talking about? Thomas had only one brother according to official records. There shouldn't have been another. Cole reopened the Mercer family census records from the 1950s.
Father.
Mother. Thomas. Elizabeth.
Jacob.
Nothing else. Then he noticed something unusual. The 1960 census listed 6 family members, not 5. One child had been crossed out in black ink. The name was almost completely obscured. Forensic enhancement slowly recovered a few letters. Samuel. Samuel Mercer. No birth certificate. No school records. No death certificate. No military records. Officially, he had never existed. Emily stared at the screen. Someone erased 2 members of this family. Elizabeth, Samuel, both vanished from history. One with a fake death. One without any record at all. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired church secretary called after seeing news coverage of Sarah's identification. "I found something years ago." What? A baptism book. It didn't make sense. The faded church register had been hidden inside a storage closet since the early 1980s. Most pages listed ordinary baptisms. Then Emily reached March 1966. One entry had been scratched out violently. Infrared photography restored the original writing. Infant Sarah Mercer. Parents: Elizabeth Mercer.
Father:
Blank.
No surname.
No explanation. Just empty space. Emily looked at Cole. Sarah had been born a Mercer, not a Whitmore. The church had recorded the truth before someone attempted to erase it. Another note appeared beside the baptism entry. Written by the pastor. Child placed under family protection by request of Samuel. Samuel, the missing brother. For the first time, investigators had proof he wasn't imaginary. He had been alive when Sarah was born. And he had personally intervened. Daniel searched every regional newspaper between 1965 and 1970. Nothing. Then a tiny classified notice published in April 1966 caught his attention. Samuel Mercer requesting immediate contact with Elizabeth. Family emergency. No follow-up. No explanation. Just one advertisement. 3 days later, Elizabeth officially died. Emily drove back to Black Creek Cemetery before sunset. She stood in front of Elizabeth's empty grave. Fresh excavation soil surrounded the open plot. Something bothered her. Not the empty coffin. The headstone. She brushed decades of moss away from its base. Near the bottom edge, almost hidden beneath dirt, were tiny engraved initials. SM. Not Elizabeth. Not the cemetery. Samuel Mercer. Someone had paid for the headstone. Someone who supposedly never existed. As darkness settled over the cemetery, Emily noticed another grave only 15 feet away. Neglected. Broken. Nearly swallowed by weeds. The name had faded almost completely. After cleaning the stone, only 2 words remained readable. Mary Hale. Cole frowned. Hallett. The same surname Jacob Mercer adopted after changing his identity. Emily opened the burial register. No relatives listed. No obituary. No visitors recorded after 1994. Yet someone had recently placed fresh, white lilies on the grave. The flowers couldn't have been more than 3 days old. Someone connected to the Mercer family. Someone who knew the cemetery. Someone who was still alive. Had quietly returned to Black Creek after 30 years. And if they were tending Mary Hale's grave, there was a very real chance they knew exactly what happened to Sarah Whitmore on the night she disappeared. The white lilies were fresh. Morning dew still clung to the petals. Emily crouched beside the grave, careful not to disturb the soil. Whoever had placed the flowers here had done so within the last 72 hours. For 30 years, nobody had officially visited Mary Hale's grave. Yet someone still remembered. Someone still came back. Crime scene technicians searched the area. Most footprints had been ruined by rain. One partial shoe impression remained near the headstone. Size 11. Heavy work boot. Modern sole pattern. Far too new to have any connection with 1993. Someone had been here recently. The cemetery caretaker insisted he had seen nothing unusual. Until Emily showed him a photograph of Jacob Hale. The old man hesitated. "I've seen someone who looks like him." "When?" "About a month ago." "Are you sure?" He had a beard, wore a baseball cap, and stood here for almost an hour. Jacob Hale. Officially living in Savannah. Unofficially, returning to Black Creek in secret. The surveillance team immediately requested highway camera footage covering the previous 6 weeks. Hours later, analysts located a dark green Ford pickup entering Black Creek 31 days earlier. The license plate belonged to a rental company. The renter had used a Georgia driver's license. Name: Michael Stone. The photograph attached to the license looked different. Gray hair, glasses, short beard. But facial recognition software produced an 89% match. Jacob Hale. Another false identity. Cole quietly leaned back in his chair. He never stopped hiding. Emily answered. Or someone never stopped hunting him. The forensic genealogy team continued tracing Sarah's biological relatives. A new DNA match appeared overnight. 93-year-old Ruth Mercer, Thomas's aunt, living in a nursing facility outside Macon. She had never been interviewed in the original investigation. Ruth struggled to remember recent events, but when Emily mentioned Sarah Whitmore, everything became crystal clear. They told her never to ask about Elizabeth. Emily remained silent. Ruth continued. She asked anyway. What happened after that? They came back. Who? The brothers. Emily frowned. Jacob. Ruth slowly shook her head. No. Both of them. Emily's heart skipped. Both. Ruth nodded. Jacob. And Samuel. The room became completely silent. Samuel Mercer. The missing brother. The man erased from every official record. According to Ruth, he was alive in 1993. Ruth reached into the drawer beside her bed. I kept this. She handed Emily an old Christmas photograph. The date printed on the border read, December 1992. 8 months before Sarah disappeared. 5 adults stood together outside the Mercer farmhouse. Thomas, Daniel, Jacob, an elderly woman, and another man standing partly in shadow. Tall, gray-haired, one hand resting on Sarah Whitmore's shoulder. Emily turned the photograph over. The handwritten caption read, Family finally together again. That's Samuel? Ruth smiled weakly. He always came home for Christmas. Emily looked back at the picture. Samuel wasn't hiding. He wasn't missing. He was standing in plain sight. Yet no one investigating Sarah's disappearance had ever asked who he was. Digital enhancement produced another surprise. Samuel wore a company jacket. The embroidered logo became visible after several minutes of restoration. Grayson and Sons Surveying. Emily immediately recognized the name. Walter Grayson, the county clerk who forged Elizabeth's death certificate. Cole rushed to county business records. Grayson and Sons Surveying had dissolved in 1994. Its offices had been demolished years earlier. Before closing, the company specialized in land boundary surveys, property transfers, exactly the type of work connected to nearly every forged document uncovered so far. Another piece of the puzzle slipped into place. The family's secret wasn't isolated. It overlapped with county records, property ownership, false identities, and people willing to erase official history. Late that afternoon, the forensic laboratory completed testing on the brass key found in Sarah's jacket. Years of corrosion had concealed microscopic scratches. 3 letters slowly emerged beneath the stamped number. A17. Not part of the original manufacturing process. Hand-engraved afterward. Emily searched every recovered document. Nothing. Then Daniel froze. I've seen that before. He opened one of the old storage facility blueprints. Most lockers were numbered, except the underground archive room. Its internal shelving system used alphabetical sections.
Cabinet. A. Shelf.
Locker 317 had never been the destination. It had been the clue. Sarah hadn't been carrying a storage key. She had been carrying directions to something hidden in archive cabinet A17. Something the killer either failed to find or never realized she had already taken. By sunrise, the investigation had returned to the abandoned Black Creek storage facility for the 3rd time. This visit was different. The detectives ignored the rows of rusted storage units and walked directly toward the underground records room hidden beneath the old office building. Every previous search had focused on locker 317. Now, they were looking for something else. Archive cabinet A17. The basement smelled of damp concrete and mold. Emergency lights cast long shadows across rows of collapsed filing cabinets. Most labels had long since rusted away. Emily studied the original blueprint. The shelving layout no longer matched the room. Several cabinets had been moved before the facility closed. Someone had deliberately changed the archive. Daniel counted each row. A. He stopped beside the eastern wall. Only 3 cabinets remained standing. Cabinet A. Its drawers were welded shut by corrosion. Technicians spent nearly an hour carefully cutting through the steel. The first 16 drawers contained nothing except ruined rental contracts. Water had destroyed nearly every page. Then they reached drawer 17. It wouldn't open. Something inside blocked the mechanism. The drawer was removed entirely. After several careful blows from a rubber mallet, the warped metal finally released. Inside rested a single weatherproof document tube.
No paperwork.
No rental files. Just the tube. Someone had emptied the entire drawer decades earlier and left only one item behind. Cole unscrewed the cap. Inside lay a folded county survey map, a cassette tape, and a sealed envelope. The envelope carried only 4 handwritten words. If Sarah finds this... Emily stared at the writing. Sarah had never found it. Instead, the key remained hidden in her pocket until her body was discovered 30 years later. The letter was opened inside the forensic lab. The paper had yellowed with age, but remained readable. The first sentence changed everything. Sarah, if you're reading this, then your mother trusted you enough to tell the truth. Emily immediately looked toward Cole. Your mother. Not Helen Whitmore. Elizabeth Mercer. The unsigned letter continued. Elizabeth never died. She disappeared because someone wanted the Mercer family erased. If Samuel fails, you must leave Black Creek immediately.
No signature.
Only a final warning. Never tell Jacob where the originals are hidden. Jacob. Not the police. Not strangers. Jacob. For the first time, the hidden messages identified a member of the Mercer family as someone who could not be trusted. Daniel inserted the recovered cassette into a restored recorder. Static crackled for several seconds. Then a woman's voice emerged.
Weak. Calm.
Older than Emily expected. My name is Elizabeth Mercer. No one in the room moved. A woman officially declared dead in 1966 was speaking from a tape recorded decades later. If anyone hears this, I survived. Emily felt her pulse quicken. I left Black Creek to protect Sarah. They told everyone I died. It was the only way to keep her alive. Elizabeth paused. Her breathing sounded uneven. They said Samuel could protect us. I believed him. Another pause. I was wrong. The tape continued. Samuel wasn't hiding us. He was hiding the truth. Cole replayed the sentence. Again and again. Samuel, the mysterious missing brother, had gone from protector to possible suspect. The recording ended abruptly after one final sentence. If Jacob learns where I am, and none of us will survive. Silence followed.
No would.
No explanation. Only the sound of a car engine starting before the cassette clicked off. The evidence board inside headquarters changed once again. Elizabeth Mercer. Alive after 1966. Sarah Whitmore. Secret biological daughter. Jacob Hale. Living under a false identity. Samuel Mercer. Erased from public records. Every path now circled back to the same family. That afternoon, another forensic report arrived. The handwriting on the letter matched. Not Elizabeth. Not Sarah. Not Daniel. It belonged to Walter Grayson, the county clerk, the same man who forged Elizabeth's death certificate decades earlier. Emily frowned. Why would Grayson help hide Elizabeth? And then warn Sarah? No one had an answer. As investigators packed away the recovered evidence, the dispatcher rushed into the conference room. We've got another call. What happened? A farmer reported finding an abandoned pickup. Where? Old Mill Road. Emily's expression changed instantly. That road hadn't been used in years. It led to only one place: the burned remains of Grayson and Sons Surveying, the company once linked to Walter Grayson, and the last employer ever connected to the mysterious Samuel Mercer. Old Mill Road had almost disappeared beneath 30 years of neglect. Pine branches arched over the cracked pavement, forming a tunnel of shadows that blocked the afternoon sun. The burned remains of Grayson and Sons Surveying stood at the end of the road, blackened brick walls rising from waist-high weeds like the skeleton of a forgotten building. The abandoned pickup waited near the collapsed loading dock. Its engine was cold. The driver's door stood open. No one was inside. The license plate belonged to the rental company that had leased a truck to Michael Stone, the alias used by Jacob Hale. Cole slowly walked around the vehicle. There were no signs of forced entry. No blood. No broken glass. Only a leather satchel lying on the passenger seat. Inside were bottled water, road maps, a flashlight, and a newspaper printed 3 days earlier. Jacob had been here recently. Emily searched beneath the driver's seat. She recovered a motel receipt from Macon dated 48 hours earlier. One room. Paid in cash. The signature simply read,
J. Merci.
For the first time in decades, someone had stopped hiding behind the Hale surname. The burned survey office had officially been destroyed in an electrical fire in 1994. Insurance investigators ruled it accidental. Emily wasn't convinced. Too many accidents surrounded this family. Too many records had disappeared in convenient fires. The building's basement had survived the blaze. Concrete stairs led into darkness. The air smelled of wet ash and rust. Flashlights swept across broken filing cabinets and collapsed ceiling beams. Then Daniel noticed something unusual. One wall had been rebuilt with newer bricks. The mortar looked decades newer than the surrounding foundation. Someone had sealed a room after the fire. Construction workers carefully removed the first row of bricks. A hollow space appeared behind them. Not a room.
A narrow passage.
At the end stood a heavy steel door. Unlike everything else inside the ruined building, the door showed almost no fire damage. It had been protected. The lock had long since rusted away.
Cole pushed gently.
The hinges groaned. The hidden archive opened. Shelves filled the small chamber from floor to ceiling. Dozens of cardboard document boxes remained perfectly dry. Every box carried the same handwritten label, Mercer Family Trust. Emily opened the first box. Property deeds, tax records, private correspondence. Nothing immediately connected to murder. The second box contained family photographs stretching back to the 1940s. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, military papers, an entire family history. Then she opened box 5. Everything changed. Inside rested a thick folder marked Confidential, Paternity. The oldest document dated back to 1965. Laboratory reports, blood typing results, private medical letters. At the very top sat a typed statement. Elizabeth Mercer refuses to identify the biological father. Below it, another page, handwritten. Samuel already knows. Cole read the sentence twice. Samuel knew. About Sarah. About the father. Perhaps about everything. Another sealed envelope lay beneath the medical records. The outside carried a warning. Open only if Sarah learns the truth. Emily carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The letter had been written by Elizabeth Mercer herself. Sarah, if you have reached this point, then someone has broken every promise I was given. You deserve the truth that was stolen from both of us. Emily continued reading. Your father was never part of this family. He came to Black Creek only once. Samuel promised he would never return. He lied. The room fell silent. Another mystery emerged. Sarah's biological father wasn't a Mercer. He wasn't a Whitmore. He was someone who had arrived in Black Creek briefly, and vanished. Daniel searched the remaining files. One photograph slipped from the folder. A black and white image taken outside the old county courthouse. Elizabeth stood beside an unidentified man wearing a sheriff's deputy uniform. His name tag was barely visible. Forensic enhancement slowly revealed the lettering.
R. Grayson.
Not Walter Grayson. Richard Grayson. Walter's younger brother. A deputy sheriff in 1965. Officially killed in a boating accident the following year. Emily looked toward Cole. The Graysons have been tied to this family for almost 30 years before Sarah disappeared. Cole nodded slowly. And maybe much longer than that. As investigators packed the newly discovered files, Daniel found one final object hidden beneath the bottom shelf. A small cassette recorder, already loaded with a tape. Unlike every other recording recovered so far, this one had a label, written in faded blue ink. Play after Jacob returns. No date.
No signature.
Only those 4 words. Emily pressed the play button. Static crackled softly. Then an older male voice filled the room.
Calm.
Measured. I don't think any of us are getting out of this alive. The voice paused. If you're hearing this. But then Samuel finally made his choice. The voice echoed through the quiet archive room. No one recognized it immediately. It wasn't Thomas Mercer. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Jacob. The speaker sounded older.
Calm.
Controlled. The kind of man who had rehearsed every word before pressing the record button. The tape hissed softly. Then he continued. My name is Richard Grayson. Emily immediately looked toward Cole. Richard Grayson. The deputy sheriff officially declared dead in a boating accident in 1966. If this recording was genuine, Richard had survived long enough to make it. The reports will say I drowned. Don't believe them. Nothing about this family happened by accident. Emily's notebook slowly closed. Every official death connected to the Mercer family was beginning to collapse. Elizabeth, alive after her supposed death. Richard, apparently alive after his. How many more identities had been fabricated? The recording continued. Walter agreed to help me. He believed destroying records would protect everyone. Instead, it destroyed the truth. Cole replayed the sentence. Walter Grayson, the county clerk who forged certificates, hadn't acted alone. His younger brother had been involved from the very beginning. The next words were even more disturbing. Samuel wanted to disappear the child. Elizabeth refused.
Jacob chose Samuel.
Daniel chose Elizabeth. Emily stared at the speaker. The Mercer family hadn't been united. They had split into opposing sides decades before Sarah vanished. A loud click interrupted the recording. Then Richard spoke again, this time barely above a whisper. If Sarah ever discovers who she is, that they will come back to Black Creek. 30 years later. That prediction had come true. The tape ended abruptly. No names. No explanation of who they were. Only silence. The evidence board inside headquarters was becoming impossible to ignore. Every discovery answered one question while creating 3 more. Elizabeth had survived. Richard Grayson had survived long enough to leave recordings. Samuel had disappeared from every public record. Jacob had lived under a false identity. Sarah learned the truth. And within days she was murdered. Late that evening, another forensic report arrived. The handwriting found on the envelope labeled, "If Sarah finds this," had finally been compared against thousands of archived county documents. It matched. Not Walter Grayson. Not Elizabeth Mercer. Not Samuel. It belonged to Daniel Mercer. Emily frowned. Daniel had written the letter himself. But why pretend it came from someone else? Thomas Mercer was questioned again. This time, he looked exhausted. He no longer denied knowing pieces of the story. I told Daniel to run. Did he? He tried. What stopped him? Thomas lowered his eyes. Family. Emily placed the letter on the table. Why would Daniel write this? Thomas stared at the handwriting. For several long moments, he said nothing. Then he whispered, because Sarah never found it. According to Thomas, Daniel had hidden the documents inside archive cabinet A17 after realizing Sarah had disappeared. He believed she was still alive. He believed one day she would return to Black Creek searching for answers. She never did. Instead, her body remained buried beneath Hollow Field. As investigators left the interview room, Daniel, the forensic analyst, rushed toward them carrying another report. We've identified the fingerprints from the archive room. Emily expected Jacob, or Samuel. Instead, the report listed a completely different name. Sheriff Harold Bennett, the same sheriff who led the original investigation in 1993. The room fell silent. Harold Bennett had personally supervised Sarah Whitmore's missing person case. He had stood before television cameras promising to find her. He had directed every search, approved every warrant, held every press conference. And somehow, his fingerprints were inside a hidden archive that officially did not exist. Emily slowly looked toward Cole. He knew. Cole didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke. No. He knew where the truth was hidden. Harold Bennett had retired in 2001. He was now 84 years old, still alive, still living less than 20 miles from Black Creek. Cole closed the case file. For the first time since Sarah's remains were identified, the investigation had a living witness who might know why decades of evidence had disappeared. And if Bennett had hidden the archive, he almost certainly knew why Sarah Whitmore had to die the night she uncovered the Mercer family's secret. Sheriff Harold Bennett answered the door before the detectives knocked. It was as if he had been expecting them. The 84-year-old stood perfectly straight despite his age. His white hair was neatly combed. His eyes were steady. He looked at Nathan Cole, then at Emily Ross. Finally, his gaze settled on the evidence box in Cole's hands. You found the archive. It wasn't a question. It was an admission.
Cole said nothing.
Harold stepped aside. You better come in. The living room resembled a museum. Commendation plaques, old sheriff's badges, photographs with governors and state troopers. 30 years of law enforcement. Only one case was missing. There wasn't a single photograph of Sarah Whitmore. Emily placed the recovered cassette recorder on the coffee table. You've heard this before. Harold nodded once. Many years ago. You knew Richard Grayson was alive. I did. You never told anyone. No. The silence stretched. Finally, Harold spoke. Because if I had, everyone connected to that family would have been dead within a week. Emily leaned forward. Who were they hiding from? Harold looked toward the rain falling outside his window. I spent 30 years asking myself the wrong question. What was the right one? They weren't hiding. They were protecting someone. Cole frowned. Sarah? Harold slowly shook his head. No. Elizabeth. The old sheriff disappeared into another room. When he returned, he carried a small cedar box. The wood had darkened with age. He placed it carefully on the table. I promised Richard I'd never open this. You kept that promise? For 30 years. Cole opened the lid. Inside lay an old deputy's badge, a wedding ring, and a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in fading blue ink, were 6 words. Only after Samuel is gone. Emily carefully broke the brittle wax seal. Inside was a handwritten statement signed by Richard Grayson. Samuel Mercer isn't the killer. Nobody moved. Emily read the sentence again. He only helped cover what happened. Cole's expression hardened. If Samuel didn't kill Sarah, who did? Harold closed his eyes. I don't know. For the first time since the investigation reopened, someone was telling the truth by admitting they didn't have the answer. The statement continued. Jacob saw everything. Daniel tried to stop it. Elizabeth never learned the whole truth. If Jacob ever speaks, the case ends. Jacob. Again. Every trail returned to him. Before the detectives could ask another question, Harold quietly reached into his shirt pocket. He removed a folded piece of paper. I received this 2 days ago. Emily unfolded it. There was no envelope. No postage. Someone had slipped it beneath Harold's front door. The message contained only one sentence. Stop digging before Hollow Field claims another family.
No signature. No fingerprints.
Fresh black ink. Someone knew the investigation was closing in. Outside, crime scene technicians searched Harold's mailbox and front porch. Nothing. No surveillance cameras. No witnesses. The neighborhood had seen only a dark sedan driving slowly through the street shortly before dawn. No license plate. No clear description. As detectives prepared to leave, Harold stopped them. "There's one place you haven't searched." Cole turned. "Where?" "The old Whitmore house." Emily frowned. "We searched it in 1993. Harold nodded. "You searched the rooms." He looked directly at Cole. "You never searched beneath them." Less than an hour later, the team stood inside Sarah Whitmore's abandoned farmhouse. The structure had deteriorated badly over 3 decades. Broken windows, rotting floorboards, peeling wallpaper. Yet one thing immediately caught Emily's attention. The kitchen floor sounded hollow. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed a void beneath the foundation. Not a basement. A crawl space. Large enough for someone to enter. Large enough to hide something. Or someone. The first floorboards were carefully lifted. A narrow wooden ladder disappeared into darkness. Cole switched on his flashlight and descended. Dust filled the confined space. Old support beams stretched in every direction. Near the far wall sat a rusted metal trunk wrapped in a faded canvas tarp.
No lock.
No markings. Just decades of dirt. Emily knelt beside it. Together, she and Cole slowly lifted the lid. Inside, there were no weapons, no cash.
No jewelry.
Only dozens of unopened letters. Every envelope was addressed to the same person. Sarah Mercer.
Not.
Sarah Whitmore. Sarah Mercer. Someone had been writing to Sarah under her real name long before she ever discovered the truth about her identity. And judging by the yellowed postmarks, the letters had begun arriving in 1978, when Sarah was only 13 years old. Emily lifted the first envelope with gloved hands. The paper was brittle, stained by decades of humidity, but the seal had never been broken. Every letter had been carefully addressed. Sarah Mercer. Not Whitmore. Mercer. Whoever sent them had always known her true identity, long before Sarah herself did. The oldest envelope carried a postmark from June 1978. Sarah would have been 13 years old. Emily unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate. "Happy birthday, Sarah. One day you'll understand why I can't come home. Until then, remember one thing. Never believe everything adults tell you."
No signature.
Only a single initial.
E.
Emily looked toward Cole. Elizabeth. It had to be. Sarah's biological mother had apparently been alive, writing letters to her daughter. Yet none of them had ever been delivered. The second letter was dated 1981. "I saw you today from across the street. You smiled without knowing who I was. That was enough for me." Emily's chest tightened. Elizabeth had been close enough to see her daughter. Close enough to speak. But she never did. Every letter told the same heartbreaking story. Birthdays. Christmas. Graduation. Sarah's first job. Her marriage. The death of her husband. Elizabeth had somehow known about every major event in Sarah's life. She had watched from a distance. Always hidden. Always silent. Then Emily reached the final unopened envelope.
Postmarked.
August 15th, 1993. 3 days before Sarah disappeared. Inside was only a single page. "I'm tired of hiding. Meet me where your uncle first kept the truth. Come alone. It's finally time." Signed in full. Elizabeth Mercer. The room fell completely silent. Cole checked the postmark again. Authentic. This wasn't a forgery. Sarah had received an invitation to meet her biological mother. 3 days before she vanished. The obvious question followed. Why had the letter remained hidden beneath Sarah's floor? Emily turned the envelope over. There was no mailing address.
No postage stamp.
It had never entered the postal system. Then hidden every letter before Sarah could find them. The handwriting team compared the ink to previous documents. The results stunned everyone. The letters were genuine. Elizabeth Mercer had written them, but fingerprints recovered from the envelopes belonged to someone else. Daniel Mercer. Daniel hadn't written the letters. He had intercepted them. For years. Perhaps decades. Thomas Mercer broke down during his next interview. I told him to burn them. Emily looked up. He couldn't. Why not? He loved Sarah like a sister. So, why hide the letters? Thomas covered his face. Because Samuel said if Sarah ever met Elizabeth, that they'd both be killed. Another name. Another warning. Everything still pointed towards Samuel Mercer. Yet every piece of physical evidence stopped just short of proving he committed any crime. That evening, forensic analysts finished restoring the survey map recovered from Archive Cabinet A-17. A faint red circle appeared after digital enhancement. Not Hollow Field. Not Black Creek Storage. The location was nearly 20 miles away. An abandoned church known locally as St. Luke's Chapel. The map contained one handwritten note. She waited here every year. Emily immediately understood. Elizabeth hadn't disappeared forever. She had been returning, year after year, waiting, hoping, believing Sarah would eventually learn the truth and come looking for her. Before the team could organize a search of the chapel, dispatch interrupted the meeting. An emergency call had come from Savannah. Jacob Hale's apartment had been entered. Neighbors heard breaking glass. When officers arrived, the apartment was empty. No Jacob. No signs of struggle. Only one object had been left behind on the kitchen table. A folded newspaper, open to an article about Sarah Whitmore's identification. Across the front page, written in thick black marker, were 6 chilling words. "You're asking the wrong Mercer." The message was photographed before anyone touched it. "You're asking the wrong Mercer." 6 words.
No signature. No fingerprints.
The marker ink was fresh enough to smear beneath a technician's glove. Whoever left it had walked out of Jacob Hale's apartment only hours before police arrived. Yet there were no signs of forced entry. No broken lock. No damaged windows. Whoever entered had a key or had been invited inside. Jacob's apartment was almost unnaturally clean. Closets half empty. Kitchen cabinets organized. Every personal photograph missing. Every computer hard drive removed. Every notebook gone. It looked less like a home, more like someone had been preparing to disappear. An old rotary telephone sat on a small table beside the window. It wasn't connected to any phone line. The apartment had modern wiring. The rotary phone should have been useless. Cole lifted the receiver. Something rattled inside. Technicians opened the casing. Hidden beneath the dial was a tightly folded strip of paper. Only one sentence had been typed. St. Luke's. Midnight. Come alone. The note wasn't addressed to detectives. It was addressed to Jacob. Someone had arranged a meeting. Someone expected him to survive long enough to attend. Midnight arrived beneath heavy rain. St. Luke's Chapel stood abandoned deep inside the Georgia woods. The roof had partially collapsed decades earlier. Vines covered the stone walls. Broken stained glass windows reflected flashes of lightning. Emily and Cole approached carefully with tactical officers positioned hundreds of yards away. If Jacob appeared, they wanted him alive. The chapel door creaked open. Inside, only candles. Dozens of them.
Freshly lit.
Someone had been there within minutes. At the front altar rested a single cassette recorder. Already playing. A woman's voice echoed through the empty church. "My name is Elizabeth Mercer." Emily froze. Another recording. "If you're hearing this." Then Jacob finally decided to come home. The tape continued. "I forgave him years ago. I never forgave Samuel." Cole exchanged a quick glance with Emily. Again. Samuel. The recording suddenly stopped. A loud crash echoed from somewhere behind the chapel. The tactical team rushed outside. Flashlights swept across the tree line. Branches snapped in the darkness. Someone was running. Cole pursued the figure into the woods. The man moved surprisingly fast despite his age. Rain hammered the forest floor. Mud swallowed every footprint. Finally, the runner slipped down an embankment. Cole reached him first. Pulled away the soaked hood. It wasn't Jacob. It was Thomas Mercer. "I told him not to come." Cole held him firmly. "Where's Jacob?" "I don't know." "Who's chasing him?" Thomas looked directly into Cole's eyes. The same man who's been chasing all of us. Emily searched the abandoned chapel. Behind the altar, she discovered a hidden compartment built into the stone wall. Inside rested a worn leather Bible. The pages had been hollowed out. A single black and white photograph lay inside, taken sometime during the early 1960s. 3 young men stood shoulder to shoulder. Thomas Mercer, Samuel Mercer,
and
a third man, wearing a sheriff's deputy uniform, Richard Grayson. On the back of the photograph, Elizabeth had written one final sentence. Only one of them knew who Sarah's father really was. Emily slowly lowered the photograph. Everything the investigation believed about the Mercer family suddenly shifted once again. The truth wasn't hidden inside a murder. It wasn't hidden inside forged records. It wasn't even hidden inside the family itself. It was hidden inside a single unanswered question. Who was Sarah's biological father? Rain continued falling as dawn broke over St. Luke's Chapel. The forest had fallen silent again. Thomas Mercer sat inside the back of a patrol vehicle, soaked to the bone, staring through the fogged window at the abandoned church. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't denied anything. He simply repeated the same sentence. I was too late. Emily placed the recovered photograph beside every other piece of evidence gathered over the previous weeks. The board was now covered with names, arrows, timelines, DNA reports, maps, and faded photographs. One empty space remained. Sarah's biological father. Every clue circled back to that single unanswered question. Forensic analysts digitally enhanced the photograph from St. Luke's Chapel. Richard Grayson's deputy badge became clearer. So, did something else. Pinned beneath his jacket lapel was a small circular pin. The emblem belonged to the Georgia State Children's Welfare Commission, a government agency dissolved in the early 1970s after allegations of illegal child placements. Emily's eyes widened. Richard hadn't simply been a deputy sheriff. He had worked with child relocation cases. Cases involving unofficial adoptions. Cases exactly like Sarah's. Daniel searched the newly recovered Grayson files one final time. Near the bottom of the last archive box sat a thin ledger overlooked during previous searches. Its cover read, Private Placements. Most pages had been ripped out. Only 4 remained. 3 names had been completely blacked out. The 4th entry survived. Female infant. March 1966. Transferred to Whitmore family. Authorization signed by Deputy Richard Grayson. Cole quietly closed the ledger. Richard hadn't just known about Sarah. He had personally arranged for her to be raised by the Whitmores, which meant he knew who her parents were. Perhaps he knew why Elizabeth had been forced to disappear. Meanwhile, another DNA comparison finally returned from the National Genealogy Database. Emily expected another distant Mercer relative. Instead, the report highlighted a direct paternal match. 99.8% probability. Living individual. Name, Michael Bennett. Age, 59.
Occupation.
High school history teacher. Residence, Black Creek. Michael Bennett. The son of former Sheriff Harold Bennett. Emily immediately checked the family tree. Impossible. Unless Richard Grayson and Harold Bennett had concealed more than evidence. Michael voluntarily provided a second DNA sample. The laboratory repeated the analysis twice. The result never changed. Michael Bennett and Sarah Whitmore shared the same biological father. They were half-siblings. The conference room fell silent. Harold Bennett stared at the report with trembling hands. That's impossible. Emily looked up. Unless someone lied to you too. Harold slowly sat down. For the first time in decades, the retired sheriff began speaking without hesitation. There was one man. He stopped. Cole waited. A state investigator. He came through Black Creek in 1965. He spent weeks meeting with Richard. No one ever learned why. What was his name? Harold closed his eyes. I only remember his last name. Caldwell. Daniel searched state employment records. One result appeared. James Caldwell. Senior investigator. Georgia State Children's Welfare Commission. assigned to southern Georgia in early 1966, resigned suddenly 6 months later. No forwarding address. No death certificate. He had vanished almost as completely as Samuel Mercer. Late that evening, the crime lab called. A fingerprint recovered years earlier from the hidden compartment inside Sarah's attic had finally produced a match. Not Samuel Mercer. Not Jacob Hale. Not Daniel. Not Richard Grayson. The print belonged to James Caldwell. For 30 years, investigators had searched for a killer inside one family. Now, every piece of evidence pointed toward an outsider who had quietly entered Black Creek in 1965 and left behind a trail of forged identities, hidden children, vanished witnesses, and a murder that remained unsolved. Cole looked at the evidence board one last time before leaving headquarters. Only one chapter remained unwritten. Somewhere, if James Caldwell was still alive, he carried the final truth about what happened to Sarah Whitmore on the night of August 18, 1993. The search for James Caldwell lasted 37 days. Every government archive was examined. Every surviving employee of the former Georgia State Children's Welfare Commission was interviewed. Retirement records, pension files, military databases, driver's licenses, voter registrations, one after another, they produced nothing. It was as though James Caldwell had stepped off the face of the earth after resigning in 1966. Then, just as the investigation reached another dead end, an anonymous package arrived at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. No return address.
No fingerprints.
Inside was a single cassette tape and one handwritten note. The note contained only 7 words. The truth belongs with Sarah. Finish it. The cassette was immediately transferred to the forensic laboratory. Unlike the earlier recordings, this tape was in excellent condition. Emily pressed the play button. Static crackled for only a moment before an elderly man's voice filled the room.
Calm.
Measured. Resigned. My name is James Caldwell. No one moved. After months of chasing a ghost, the ghost had finally spoken. I have lived under another name for most of my life. I am recording this because I no longer believe the truth should die with me. A long pause followed. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Sarah Whitmore was never supposed to disappear. Caldwell explained that in 1966, he had been sent to Black Creek to investigate illegal child placement practices. During that investigation, he met Elizabeth Mercer, a frightened young mother desperate to protect her newborn daughter from a violent dispute inside her own extended family. According to the recording, Richard Grayson and Walter Grayson agreed to secretly place the baby with Richard and Helen Whitmore while Elizabeth disappeared under a false identity. The arrangement was illegal, but Caldwell believed it would save the child's life. Years passed. Sarah grew up believing she was a Whitmore. Elizabeth watched from a distance. Richard Grayson protected the records. Walter altered county documents. Thomas remained silent. Daniel tried to shield Sarah from the truth. Jacob fled. Samuel carried the burden of holding the family together. Every person believed silence was protection. Instead, silence became the reason the truth was buried. Then Caldwell reached the final days of August 1993. Sarah found Elizabeth. They met. They talked. They cried. For the first time in 27 years. Mother and daughter were together. Emily closed her eyes. After decades apart, they had finally reunited. But they weren't alone. The tape hissed softly. I followed because I was afraid someone else would come. Another pause. They did. Caldwell described a heated confrontation outside Black Creek storage. Old accusations resurfaced. Hidden documents changed hands. Sarah demanded answers. Elizabeth begged everyone to leave. Daniel tried to calm the situation. Jacob shouted. Samuel argued. Nobody listened. Then came the moment that haunted Black Creek for 3 decades. There was a struggle. Sarah fell. She struck her head against a concrete loading barrier. The room fell silent. Caldwell continued. It was an accident. No one had intended to kill her. No carefully planned execution. No calculated murder. Only one terrible moment of chaos that changed every life connected to the Mercer family forever. Sarah was still breathing.
Barely.
Panic took over. Instead of calling an ambulance, the family chose fear. Fear of prison. Fear of exposure. Fear that decades of lies would finally collapse. The decision they made in those next few hours became the true crime. They buried Sarah. Alive or dead, none of them ever truly knew. The tape reached its final confession. I helped hide the records. I helped preserve the lie. I told myself it was to protect Elizabeth. I was wrong. Another long silence. If anyone deserves justice, it is Sarah. The recording ended. No dramatic music.
No final explanación.
Only the sound of an elderly man quietly placing the recorder onto a wooden table. Caldwell's confession could no longer support criminal charges. Nearly everyone directly involved had died. Others were too old or too ill to stand trial. The district attorney ultimately concluded that the available evidence could not establish beyond reasonable doubt exactly whose actions caused Sarah's fatal injuries or who made the final decision to conceal her death. The homicide remained officially unresolved. But the investigation accomplished something equally important. Sarah Whitmore's true identity was restored. Court records were corrected. Elizabeth Mercer was officially recognized as her biological mother. The forged county documents were withdrawn. The fabricated death records were canceled. Black Creek finally acknowledged the history it had spent decades trying to erase. On a quiet autumn morning, a new headstone was placed beside the old oak tree overlooking Hollow Field. It bore only a few simple words. Sarah Mercer Whitmore, 1965 to 1993. Beloved daughter. The truth returned home. Every year afterward, fresh white lilies appeared beside the stone. No one ever admitted leaving them there. Some believed it was Jacob. Others believed Elizabeth had survived long enough to visit one final time before disappearing forever. No proof was ever found. Only the flowers remained. And in Black Creek, whenever people spoke about the cold case that had haunted an entire generation, they no longer remembered it as the mystery of a missing woman. They remembered it as the story of a family whose greatest crime was believing that love could survive without truth. The case file was finally closed. The questions ended. But the silence that had buried Sarah for 30 years would forever remain the darkest evidence of all.